Let's start by taking a look at the issue that inheritance tries to solve. Let me create the same example as before, but a little more complex. So let's create a class student with the construct that receives first name, last name, but also grade. And let's create the properties for first name and properties for last name, and finally a property for the grade. Also, let's create the same method as before to get full name, which will return first name plus last name. But let's also create another method to write the grade, where we are going to return the full name plus the grade from this student. Now, let's just create an object from this class, so a new student with all the arguments that it needs. And then let's just log the student object, and let's log the grade, write grade method. If I save that, you can see that I get all the information that I need here. I have what is the student, so this is an object with first name, with the grade, and with last name. And then I also have the method writeGrade, which is printing the full name plus the grade of that student. So as you can see, everything works the same way as before. Even now I have a method, as I mentioned before. From one method I can call another method. I just need to include the keyword this. Now that I have the student class working, let's say I need a second class for professors. Let's say I'm creating an application that will manage students and professors inside a college. So let me create another class for professor, which is going to be kind of similar. So I need first name, last name, but instead of grade, let's use salary. Then the properties, first name, last name, and also a property for the salary. With those, let's create the same method as the other one to get the full name from the professor that will return first name and last name. And let's also create a method to print salary, which will return, let's return the full name again, but then let's return the salary for that professor. Now that I have this class, let's also create an object for the professor, which is going to be a new professor object with all the arguments that I need to send. Then let's just log this object, and let's also log this print salary. If I save that, you can see it also works fine. I have professor, and then I have Mary Jane's salary, where I get what is her salary. So if I expand both objects, you can see that both of them are very similar, but they have some differences. But everything works as expected. However, let's say that now I need to make a change to those classes. Let's say that I need to include age for both professor and student. That would mean that I need to make two changes to my system. I need to make a change to the class professor, and I also need to make a change to the student professor. To the student class. And this is not nice when I need to repeat the same job twice inside an application. Ideally, I would do that only once, and that would apply for both of them. So there is a way for creating a single class. Let's say both of them are persons. So I could create a class person, which would have first name, which would have last name, which would return full name. That would work for both of them. However, I also have some differences, like grade. Students has grade, while professor has a salary. Just because of that, I cannot use the same class for both of them. But how could I have a common ground between them? And that's what inheritance does. It allows us to create one class that will work as a base for everything, and then I can create subclasses from that main class, which will be an extension of that main class. And that extension will have exactly what I have for this main class, plus some changes that I need to create for those individual ones. And that's exactly what we need. We need to find a way for creating a common ground between student and professor. At the same time, we need to find some differences for each one of those. And the way I work with inheritance is that I'm going to create a class, but I also need to use the keyword extends and just specify what is the class that it is extending, what is the main class. Once I have created that, I could just use the same blueprint from this one and just create some differences for this other this new class that I am creating. Just one keyword that you need to keep in mind is that sometimes we are going to need to make a reference to our main class, to our parent class. And our main class will always be called super. So remember we talked about this object. Whenever I am working with this object, I need to use the keyword this to refer to the object that I have created from that class. The same happens if I need to specify the parent class, if I need to talk about the object that I am extending. But instead of using the keyword this, I'm going to use the keyword super. Let's make an example over that. Let's go back to the code. Let me just create a simple class called person, where I'm going to create two properties, first name and last name. So this dot first name receives the parameter first name, and this dot last name receives the parameter last name. And also let me create the method getFullName, which again will return first name plus last name. Once I have this class, I can use that for whatever I need. So let's create a new object person, where I need to provide first name and last name. And then I can log this object, and let's also log the result from the method getFullName. So everything that we have done so far is here. We have the constructor, we have the properties, we have the method, we get the properties from that object, and then I create the object from that class. I provide the arguments, I log the object, I get the result from the method, and that's what I have here. I have first name and last name. There is no difference from what we have seen so far. But now I want to create a subclass. I want to extend person to become also a student. So I'm going to create a new class called student, which will extend person. And just that. Let's then create a new object student. And let's also log all the information. So let's log the object student, and let's log the result from getFullName. And there we go. If I save that, you can see that everything still works as expected. So whenever I am working with inheritance, all I need to do is use this keyword extends, and then the class that I want to extend, in this case person. Just like that, out of the box, student and person has exactly the same thing. You can see if I extend the person here, I have first name and last name, and if I expand student, I have first name and last name. But for my student, I am trying to send here also the grade for the student, because this is what I am expecting to have. But as you can see, there is nowhere where I am seeing that grade, because it is just ignoring this last argument that I have provided. This is when I need to start making some changes to my subclass and create some custom properties for this one. So let's start by trying to do this. Let me create a constructor for this student where I'm going to receive grade, and then I'm going to create the property grade. So if I am inheriting all the properties from person, now I should have a new person for student. But if I save that, as you're going to see, I am going to get an error, because whenever I have a constructor for a class that extends another one, I am required to include the call to the super constructor. So once I didn't have the constructor, that would work fine, no issues there. You can see everything works. But as soon as I create a constructor for a subclass, I am required to, inside this constructor, to call super. That one is going to be the constructor for the person object. And for the person object, it is expecting to receive first name and last name, which I don't have here. I have just grade, which I am receiving. So this constructor is required to receive whatever this superclass requests. Or if I have this information, I could give here, but I don't have. So in this case, I want to create first name and last name. So now I have a constructor to the student, which will receive first name, last name, and grade, which is the structure I am trying to use right here. Then, once I get inside the constructor, I need to call super, where I need to provide first name and last name. If I save that, you can see that now everything works. So if I extend person, I have first name, last name. If I expand student, I have first name, last name, and grade. So again, I am extending person, which will inherit all the properties from this class. And then from here, if I want to have its own properties, I can create, but as soon as I have a constructor, I need to call the super and provide everything it needs. Since it needs first name and last name, I am receiving first name and last name here, just so I can pass along, and also what else I need for this class. And just like that, I have a subclass that has the same properties from the base one. Let's do that again, but now for the professor class. So let me again create a new class for professor, which will extend person. And again, I want to create a constructor which will receive first name, last name, but also the salary. And then I need to call the superclass sending first name and last name. And then I can create the property salary, which will be just for this class. Then I can create the object professor, which is going to be a new professor, and then I give all the arguments it needs. And then I can log this object and just take a look on everything that I have. Let's also log the method getFullName and just see what we get from there. If I save, you can see everything works. I have person, which has first name, last name. I have student, which has first name, grade, and last name. And I have professor, which has first name, last name, and salary. And as you can see, I have access to all properties from the main class. If I want to call a method like getFullName, professor doesn't have the method getFullName, but person has. So it goes to the parent class and just executes the function from there. And with that, I do have two different classes, one for student, one for professor, but I also have some common ground. I also have some base class that I can use to share that information with other classes. Besides the properties, so whenever I create a constructor, I need to call super, but I can also create some other methods. As we have seen, we can share the same methods, but I can also have some methods that will belong only to that subclass. So let's do that. Let's go back to the code and let me create, let's start with student. Let me create a method that will belong only to student to write grade, where I want to return this dot get full name plus the grade of the student. Once I have this method, I can use that whatever I want. So right here I am creating the object student. Let me just log student.writeGrade. If I save, you can see that it works. I have student, full name, and then John Smith's grade 9.5. This is what I'm getting from here. Whenever I log this grade, I get 9.5. So it is working as before, but now I have a shorter student class. And again, this method belongs only to the student class. Let's say I go and try to log professor.writeGrade. If I save, you can see I get an error because there is no write grade for professor. The same happens with the person class. If I try to use console log person.writeGrade, if I save, I get an error because there is no write grade for person. This is something that belongs only to student. And I can have an exclusive class for professor as well. So let's say I want to create here print salary method where I want to create return get full name and just return the salary as well. Once I have that, I can go ahead and print that for professor. So print salary. If I save, you can see it works. At the end, I have here print salary, which returns the salary for that professor, and I have a method that is exclusive for this professor class. So again, if I go here to my student and I try to print student.print salary, if I save that, I get an error because there is no method print salary for my student method, my student class. It belongs only to my professor class. So this is how I can create different classes while still having some base for everything. I create a base class and then I can extend each other class from here. If I needed to, I could get a subclass and extend again. So let's say I want to extend student to become another subclass, I could do that. So I can extend the main class, I can extend a subclass, and every time that I extend, I will inherit all the properties and all the methods from the main class. And all of those will belong to the subclass that I am creating. Now, there is only one final thing that I want to recap about the class inheritance, and that's overrides. Let's go back to the code. So we have our main class here, which is person, and we have the method getFullName, and then we have subclasses. They are inheriting from person, and we are using all the properties and methods that comes from that base class. So when I get here, for example, in the professor class, I create a new object, and then I call here professor.printSalary. What the system is doing is, it goes inside this professor object, and look, do I have a method called printSalary? And I do. So it executes this method and return whatever it needs to return. And that's what we have here, the full name, Mary Jane, and the salary. As for this other method, getFullName, if we look inside the professor class, it's going to see, do I have a method called getFullName? And no, I do not have one. However, it is extending person, so the system will go and take a look. Do I have inside this parent class a method called getFullName? And I do. So it's going to be executed, and I get the result of that, which is this line right here, where we get the full name for the professor. But here's the deal. Right now, we have here a method that is returning Mary Jane, which is the first name plus the last name, which works fine, but let's say that it is the expected behavior for person, it is the expected behavior for student, but for some reason, I need something different for professor. Let's say that for professor, I need to print the last name and the first name. How can I do that? Can I override a method? And yes, I can. So if I create the same method again, but returning something different, in this case I want to return last name and first name, then whenever I get to execute this function, the system will look again. Do I have a method called getFullName inside the class professor? And I do. In this case, this is what it's going to be returning. So if I save that now, you can see that for Danny, we have Danny Johnson, we have John Smith, but for Mary Jane, we have Jane, Mary. So I am overriding the method inside the parent class, just creating a method with the same name. I will not have a conflict. I will just execute a different one whenever I call for this type of object. And one final thing, let me just delete here. And let's say this, okay, that works fine, get full name is printing whatever I need, but what about print salary? I am getting here, for print salary, I am calling the method get full name. But let's say that for print salary, I need that to be different from this one. I mean, I could just go ahead and code whatever I have inside here, but here's one trick. Inside the print salary, I'm calling this.getFullName, which means I am looking inside this class for this method getFullName, and I do have this one. And what if I want to go over this override? I don't want to execute this override, and I want to get the parents one. I want to get this method for this other method that I have inside here. So if I call this.getFullName, I will execute the method that I have inside this class, if available. If I want to go ahead and get from the parent, remember the parent we get to reference that using the keyword super. So if I replace it, instead of this.getFullName, I call super.getFullName, I will not execute this method, but instead I'm going to execute this one. So if I save this code now, you can see that here, whenever I call professor get full name, I get this new structure, last name plus first name. But once I call print salary, I will return the full name from the parent, so I get Mary Jane's salary, and that's just a different way for me to choose. If I have override, do I want to execute the one from inside my class, or I want to execute that from my parent class? And that's it about inheritance. This is all the features that we need to be aware of, how to create objects inside JavaScript, and how we can use the same base for multiple subclasses.